I would like to call the business meeting of the Portland Board of Public Education to order. It's Tuesday, January 22nd. The Portland Board of Public Education is meeting in Casco Bay High School in the great room, the great space. May I please ask the superintendent to call the roll?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Mr. Atkinson?
Here.
Mr. Balfons?
Here.
Ms. Bondo?
Présente.
Ms. Figdor?
Here.
Ms. Davis? Ms. Morioni?
Here.
Ms. Thompson?
Here.
Ms. Trevorrow?
Here.
Mr. Inabanza?
Here.
Mr. Norris?
Here.
Ms. Power-Rakowski? Mr. Samuntu?
Présent.
Mr. Abdirahman?
Here.
And Chair Rodriguez.
Presente. Would everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I think, and I just heard from Ms. Davis, she's going to join us. She's just running a few minutes late. For the report of the chair, I want to say that it was great to see so many fellow board members last night at Portland's 38th annual Martin Luther King Jr. celebration. The event included several Portland student performances and presentations, and also the end of an 8-year absence by Maine's governor from the state's largest annual Martin Luther King Jr. Day celebration. Governor Janet Mills, along with some of the other speakers last night who reflected on his memory, also reminded us that there's much more work to do advancing the work of Dr. King. I'm proud to see the intersection between his work and that of the Portland Promise goals. Just think of the connection between our commitment to prepare and empower students and this quote from an essay written by Dr. King in 1947 titled "The Purpose of Education," where he states, "We must remember that intelligence is not enough. Intelligence plus character, that is the goal of true education. The complete education gives one not only power of concentration, but worthy objectives upon which to concentrate. The broad education will, therefore, transmit to one not only the accumulated knowledge of the race, but also the accumulated experience of social living." Thank you again for everyone who was there last night. It really was a special evening. In a few moments, we're going to hear reports of the work of each of the board's committees over the last year and a look ahead of what they will cover. Part of this work from the Curriculum Committee includes a series of workshops detailing options for pre-K expansion in the district. Related to that work, I want to share that our partners in Portland Connect Ed will be supporting a pre-K revenue ad hoc group charged with developing recommendations for a pre-K expansion revenue plan. I've asked board member Figdor, and she has agreed to be the board representative in that group. The ad hoc group's commitment includes reviewing up-to-date financial analysis for pre-K expansion and revenue strategies from other communities. They will meet at least 2 times in the first half of 2019 to evaluate options and find agreement on recommendations, and the group may decide to schedule more meetings if necessary. They will also produce recommendations to be shared with ConnectEd Steering Committee, the Pre-K Advisory Council, the Board of Public Education, and the City Council. Thank you, Ms. Figdor, for taking this work on for the board. I also want to plug an article that came out today on the Forecaster, highlighting this Saturday's Parent University event, Kids See Color, talking to kids about race. The article was shared on the district's social media, so please look for it and share it with your friends. And a reminder that the event is going to take place this Saturday at East End Community School from 1 to 3 p.m. And then lastly, I want to update the board members that our work updating the school board's page on the district website is almost done. We're all going to receive a link allowing us to see to preview the new layout and the content for us to approve it, including our personal pages before it goes live. If you haven't already done so, please send me any updated contact information or personal information and a short bio that you'd like to include in your page. keep in mind that this is one place where the public will likely search to contact us, so it's an opportunity for us to make a good first impression. That's all that I have for tonight. Thank you. And now, oh yes, for the report of the students, Ali Abdirahman is doing his first report from Deering High School. Go ahead, Ali.
Deering is implementing an academic lab system where students who have failed a course but have learned some concepts can focus on exactly what they're struggling with instead of retaking the entire course, which has shown to be the best way to improve learning. Students can do units using the school's online learning program, Edmentum, under the supervision of the academic lab teacher, or they can have work provided directly from the teacher of the original course. With Deering having the highest number of students taking access testing, it would be wrong to continue normal classes. Starting with last year, the school, on the day of access testing, designs its lessons for all classes around language acquisition, so all Deering students are working on growing knowledge through language. While their fellow students take the access, others will go to their regularly scheduled blocks, but instead of studying their traditional subject, everyone in Block 1, for instance, will learn about a new topic, like hunger or human migration. Then together in groups use language and shared discussion to add to their insight theories about the topic and improve their knowledge. Student groups are proposing ways for Deering students to participate in curriculum discussions with teachers and administration so that we have a voice in the curriculum. The school's shared leadership team, which is made up of cluster coordinators and administration, hosted students from the school's new Black Student Union and the Gay Straight Alliance to hear about how they, along with other students, would like to be more represented and to continue to diversify the Deering curriculum. The hope is to create a process for students and teachers to meet and talk before a course is launched, so student voice can be considered as a teacher is designing a new or existing course. Some seniors are beginning to finalize their capstone projects, from building a greenhouse on campus to supporting some of our most vulnerable students in different experiences and classes, to various leadership projects such as advancing the school's mentoring program, to finding ways for students to have a voice in designing courses and curriculum. Every senior will present a capstone project, and at Deering, one aspect needs to be making a difference. Seniors are also hearing from colleges, including acceptances at the New School, Clark, Stetson, Mount Holyoke, Smith, UNE, University of Vermont, Penn State, Assumption, St. Anselm, and American University, to name a few. Deering will also now have additional recognition of students using the Latin honor system along with the honor roll system. Students will receive a letter home if their GPA was between 89 and 92, cum laude, with honor, 93 and 96, magna cum laude, with great honor, and between 97 and 100, summa cum laude, with highest honor. But regular honor roll is 85 or better for honors, and 93 or better in all classes for high honors, which will also be announced.
Thank you, Ali. I'd say, in hearing you speak of your of students wanting to have a voice in curriculum at this school, I think that's really special to hear that the students are taking that initiative. If there's anything that the board can do to support that or to help the students play a role, please bring that up. I'm sure we'd be more than happy to help you guys out. Also to point out, I've met the students who are working on the greenhouse capstone project. They've actually been supportive of the garden network group work from the Food Fuse Learning Report. So they've shown up to a couple of our meetings. They've asked a lot of questions, and they've helped, they've asked for our support. So again, it's just a great group of students, and I'm really happy that they've chosen that as their capstone. And again, if there's anything we can continue to do to support them, I'll be more than happy to. And now I guess we're up for the report of the superintendent, Mr. Butano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Nice job, Mr. Abdirahman, on your maiden voyage, and that was an incredibly informational report, so thank you very much. I also want to thank our amazing facilities and maintenance crews for working all day yesterday to get school ready to open today. The storm wound up not being or packing the punch that we thought it might, but it was blustery and cold yesterday. But our team was busy working to make sure our students and staff would find our facilities open for business today. So thank you. I also want to thank the city crews that work round the clock on Sunday to clear the streets in those miserable conditions. As you know, we've only missed one day of school because of weather, but because we had to reduce the school year by 2 days during the last budget year, the next snow day will require us to extend the year in order to meet the minimum number of days required by the state of Maine. Speaking of the state of Maine, I was thrilled to be able to welcome Governor Janet Mills to King Middle School last Friday as part of the citizenship swearing-in ceremony at the school. Governor Mills welcomed new Americans and showed her keen understanding of the importance of immigrants to the future of Maine's economic and cultural future. I want to thank Principal Caitlin LeClaire, the King faculty, and the amazing King 7th grade students for hosting this uplifting event. The Curriculum Committee hosted the first of 3 workshops on pre-K scale-up last week, and 2 more workshops are scheduled, one for tomorrow and the other for January 29th. I would like to also thank our ConnectEd partners for their support of this critical work. As you know, the board is committed to expanding pre-K, and these workshops are designed to explore the different pathways to accomplishing it. Our enrollment and facility study continues. After tonight's board meeting, we will have a workshop to update the full board on the work to date and what to expect next in the study. We concluded the background building phase and are now beginning to cost out the possible scenarios that have been surfaced by the Commission. Tonight's workshop, which will happen when we conclude, that will also be broadcast. And finally, I would like to echo Chair Rodriguez's invitation to all members of the board and the community to our next Parent University event, Kids See Color, talking to your children about race, this Saturday, January 26th, from 1 to 3 p.m. at East End Community School. So on this day, after we are celebrating, or after the celebrations for the birthday of Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., I believe that this program will help to continue to advance his life work to create a more just and equitable world. I would like to thank Grace Valenzuela and her Parent University team for continuing to create programming that responds to our community's needs and that challenges us to come together as a community to tackle the problems that we face. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Superintendent. For the report of the Secretary, consideration and action to approve the meeting minutes of, I know we had another one.
December 18th.
Let's do December 18th, 2018. Is there a motion? Ms. Thompson, seconded by Ms. Trevorrow. Any questions on the motion? None. Any public comment on the motion? None. Any board discussion? Excellent.
Can I just make a comment?
Please.
So I just want to point out for members of the public who might look at the agenda in board docs or even members of the board that at the last meeting we did not approve the December 18th because there was a comment made that they had not been properly posted. I do want to point out that in board docs, there is a click-through to those minutes, so they are always there. Given that, obviously, that wasn't really clear to everybody, we've also started to PDF those and attach them as attachments. But if you look in board docs, you will see that there is a click-through to those minutes. So they were accessible. They just, we had not done enough to inform you of that fact. So they are attached in addition to available through a click-through.
Thank you, Superintendent. All those in favor of approving the minutes of December 18, 2018, please indicate. Unanimous, with the students voting in favor as well. Next, consideration and action to approve the meeting, that's a tough one for me, meeting minutes of January 3rd, 2019. Is there a motion? Ms. Trevorrow, seconded by Ms. Figdor. Any questions on the motion? None. Any public comment? None. Any board discussion? No. Excellent. Moving right along. All those in favor of approving the meeting this is such a tough word for me because it's like so many M's back to back. The meeting minutes of January 3rd, 2019, please indicate. Unanimous, with the students voting in favor as well. Thank you.
Can I, Shayna Jenry just walked in, so we were going to honor her during my report, but since she wasn't here, I skipped it, so can we do that?
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want to just speak to it?
So I want to point out that we intended to honor Shayna Genry, who is an amazing teacher, and she was not here when we did, but now you're here, so I want to. It's a grand entrance, and we're glad you're here. So why don't you come on down?
Where am I headed?
Go right in front of us. Yeah.
So, as you all know, we often recognize our teachers, and we generally do it for the work that they do inside the classroom. And our recognition today is a little bit beyond that, because it's for someone who is an outstanding teacher, but today we're also recognizing her for her exceptional literary work. Deering High School teacher Shayna Genry had poems published in Balancing Act 2, an anthology of poems by 50 Maine women by Literal Books. In late December, the Portland Press Herald published her poem entitled The Seed. At Deering, Miss Genry makes a tremendous contribution to our students. She's a teacher of English and creative writing, and she's also the co-advisor of Breccia, which is the Deering High School Literaries magazine. And I believe that that is reputed to be the oldest continuously running student literary publication in the country or something like that.
Yeah, well, we have issues dating back to the late 1800s. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I remember reading that when I was in kindergarten. That was awesome. Yeah. Yeah, in the late 1800s. So that's what I meant by that. We often struggle to convey to students how the work that they do in schools opens the doors to pursuits outside of school. I'm sure that you guys are familiar with the phrase, why do we have to learn that? Ms. Genry, as an accomplished author, models for students the relevance of what they are learning. We're very proud of you, Shayna, and we're pleased to be able to honor you tonight. And I think you're going to grace us with a poem?
Yes.
Awesome. And then we're going to grace you with a diploma or a certificate.
Finally. I also like to write satire. It's true. This is called The Seed. At first, it is only a pea, a rumor of life, and then it is a grape, a plum, a ripe persimmon. And then at 20 weeks, they say it is a baby boy. I don't believe them until I feel his limbs fluttering as I carry laundry to the basement. But I already have a panther winding around my legs. She slinks around our savanna, a shadow among the vines, her yellow eyes watching. She is wild and will attack prey in flight. And I already have a wolf. He thinks I am his mother. He watches for intruders and follows me from room to room. He is circling my husband and me, hurting us. And the grounds are overrun with skunks and possums digging up the summer's grasses and stealing summer's harvest. What I know is wild things, and still there is this child everyone wants to know. They want to buy little shirts, little pants, little shoes. But what I know is that the mice in these walls are trying to steal this crumbling plantation from me. Worms are carving mazes in the hearts of the corn stalks, and I have to fight back before this seed becomes an apple, a watermelon, a rumor no more, a sweet, soft, domestic thing, a child.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
Wait, don't leave without your
Gotta come back.
certificate. You gotta. You wanna go this way? And Grace, can you take a picture?
Sorry. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Back to our regular program.
Well, that was far better.
Okay, so for the report of the committee, we're doing our annual committee reports. The Superintendent, you want to speak on this and preface us?
Yes, so this is a annual report that's required by board policy for all of the committees. And so we are, the way that we're doing this is each of the staff members who chairs the committee has worked with the committee chair to develop the report that details, obviously, the purpose of the committee. That doesn't change significantly from year to year, but then also what work was accomplished during the 2018 year, and then what work is ahead for 2019. So in the documents that you received with the board packet, you have the full report for all of the committees, as well as the agenda as it currently stands for the coming year, including the sort of the conceptual, what is it that the committee is going to be working on, as well as in most cases also that information on a calendar. And you also received a copy of the master calendar for all of the committees as it stands today. That will obviously be adjusted as committees shift. We're trying to bring a little bit more consistency to the work of the committees, and so this is the first step to being able to getting all of that in one place. So I think the way that we're going to do this is in the order that the committees normally report, and each of the committees might be a little bit different in terms of who's reporting, whether it's the staff person or the committee chair, but I trust that you guys have talked about it in advance and that this is going to go off flawlessly. So with that, Malia, you're on. Or, actually, no, I think curriculum committee is on, so whoever's reporting for curriculum committee.
Okay. So we're going to do this together. I'm going to talk about what we did last year, and then Mr. Balfons is going to talk about our plans for this coming year. Do you need me to restate the role of the committee at all, or, okay. So for curriculum committee, over the past year, we did several things together. First, we discussed regular updates on the district-wide change management efforts related to our proficiency-based learning system. Connected to that, we collaborated with the Policy and Public Affairs Committee on 2 community forums related to proficiency-based learning. The first was just to describe to the community our general approach to proficiency-based learning, and that's where we introduced the learning beliefs and the connected teaching practices. And then the second one was focused on college entrance and proficiency-based grading. And that's where we had several colleges come and do a panel and talk to our community about their questions and concerns. We also reviewed and discussed potential changes to policy IHCD, Advanced Placement Programs. Here we considered amending the policy to loosen the requirement that students have to take the AP exam, which requires a significant fee. We drafted language to include additional testing options, but those revisions are currently on hold. And you'll see that that's in our coming year plans to take that back up. We revised policy IKF, which are the graduation requirements. This was to reflect the current 9th through 12th grade requirements, which include the credit-based requirements for our 11th and 12th graders, and the proficiency-based requirements for students in 9th and 10th grade. We also, in accordance with policy IJJ, selection of educational materials, reviewed our decision to adopt a new district-wide middle school math curriculum, which is called Illustrative Math. We drafted a resolution to express a continued commitment to expanding access to high-quality pre-K. That was brought forward to all of you for a vote recently. And then finally, we reviewed updates on several things that are connected to the district-wide teaching and learning priorities, including our Spanish immersion programming, Bayside Learning Center and day treatment program, which we're going to talk a little bit more about tonight, and then our body science and safety and sex education curriculum. We also looked at the data on academic achievement and oriented to the dashboard, the leadership dashboard that was mentioned a few meetings ago called Schoolzilla. So that's what we did this past year. You want to do the?
Yes, please, thank you. So looking ahead at the priorities for this year, first we're looking at the pre-kindergarten expansion, reviewing pathway options, and we will make a recommendation to the full board. Second, we're looking at the allocation of resources for curriculum and instruction, looking at funding the content of this curriculum and instruction over time, and measuring their progress. In particular, we're looking at, as far as curriculum and instruction, we're looking at math, early literacy. Then we have social studies, Wabanaki studies, civic engagement. Then we also have STEM, and within STEM we have elementary science and computer science. Third, we'll be looking at behavioral health, the behavioral health continuum, the Bayside evolution, and the resource investment and ongoing updates for that. Fourth, we'll be looking at potential policy review of the AP policy, plagiarism, class rank, update on graduation, and then reviewing any other policies that need to be aligned with the proficiency diploma. And fifth, we'll be getting updates on the immersion program and heritage language programming, proficiency, and how we can understand ways in which we're measuring progress and those outcomes, and then finally following through on those on the discussion around sex education. And that's all I have.
Operations Committee.
So I'm reporting on the previous year. So the work of the Operations Committee this past year was to spend a lot of time focusing in on the 2020 Capital Improvement Plan and establish a process for doing that by using the Sebago Technics Facilities Assessment as a sort of a centerpiece for that work. And then we did spend a significant amount of time last year doing level set with the committee on the different operations departments, so transportation, food service, and operations, so as to bring the work and the challenges of the different committees up to the board. And as you know, there was a significant amount of work done over the past year on the Food Security Task Force, and they presented their recommendations back in August, and since that time, the Operations Committee has been working to oversee the implementation of the Food Security Task Force. So that's the work that the Operations Committee did last year, and I'm going to turn it over to Chair Thompson to talk about the priorities for 2019.
Thank you, Superintendent. Well, there's not a shortage of things to do for operations, as we can all imagine, with all of the various District Advisory Building Committee going on and the LICET Building Committee going on and the boundaries. I can never remember.
Enrollment and facilities.
Thank you, enrollment and facilities. All of these various titles. But so we're going to have our hands full. But in addition, our priorities are to coordinate with the License Building Committee and the BFOF District Advisory Committee to revise sustainability policy, to study potential issues related to transportation, study issues related to food service, review city services, chargebacks, and evaluate alternatives to the current configuration of services, evaluate the viability of alternative energy planning for the district, which would come under the sustainability policy work as well, and develop a formal technology refresh schedule and plan, and develop the 2021 capital improvement plan recommendation. In addition to that, when the superintendent and I met, as he is the staff member and myself as the chair, looking at the calendar, the Operations Committee will be meeting the first Thursday of every month at 6 o'clock at Central Office. We have a beautiful color-coded calendar I see here, so that's a beautiful thing. And then the District Advisory Building Committee and the LICET Building Level Advisory Committee, either both of them will meet in conjunction with one another or individually on the every third Thursday of the month at 6 o'clock at LICET. And again, that's all on the schedule. But we have lots of work planned for 2019. Thank you.
Thank you. Finance and personnel.
Ms. Gardner is going to report for us.
Thank you.
Okay, so beginning last November, we started off our year with a review of the ED 279, which is the form that we receive our state subsidy on, and we had a good workshop to explain sort of the actually what turned out to be the previous form, and understand how that affects the Portland school revenue. Thereafter, we started to work on our FY 2019 budget timeline and status when we found out that the state funding formula had changed. So we did another workshop to understand sort of what had changed in the formula and how that affected us and sort of how we can maximize our revenues going forward. We also heard an update on the compensation study from our Executive Director of Human Resources, which is something I'll touch base on in our work going forward. So into February of last year, we had a joint meeting with our Policy and Public Affairs Committee. We had a presentation called Funding for Our Future, where we really sort of set a baseline on how school funding works and aim to bring the public up to speed on how we create our budget and how it's funded. March through May, we had a series of meetings where we reviewed and made recommendations to the full board for the FY 2019 superintendent's budget. That brought us through May when it was approved by the City Council. We had a series of joint meetings with the city's finance committee, as we do on a regular basis. And then we had our June referendum that our committee was sort of also involved in. So that brought us through the summer to August, where we debriefed on our budget process and made recommendations on how we can make updates for this upcoming budget process for 2020. We discussed the City of Portland's valuation and their revaluation, and talked about how it connects to the state equalized valuation. So this is an ongoing discussion that we've had a few times while we understand how those two different factors play in for Portland Public Schools. We had a presentation from staff on the Munis implementation and the Go Live experience, and talked about how we're integrating with the city's financial operating system and how we're working together in one system. And then finally, we had a budget discussion for the upcoming FY 2020 budget and reviewed how changes made at the city level on tax increment financing districts affected our valuation and our state funding going forward. So our new committee priorities for 2019 are to ensure closer collaboration with the city's finance committee and the city's legislative committee. We've regularly been attending both of those types of meetings to ensure that we're actively engaging with our legislative committee on any school funding changes. We are continuing our conversation around the revaluation and how that will affect us in the future. The committee is ensuring that the superintendent's evaluation is on their radar, as it is the finance and personnel committee, and they will be working together on the tools used for that evaluation process. They will review and make a recommendation on the compensation study that's been ongoing. They will review and make a recommendation for the FY 2020 budget process that we will start in March. And then throughout the year, we will review the current year-to-date financials.
Thank you. Policy and Legislative Committee?
So again, for this one, I will update on the work that we did this past year, and then Chair Davis will update on the priorities for 2019. So during the 2018, the committee tackled a number of policies. One that took a significant amount of work was policy JICI, the Athletic and Co-Curricular Activities Code of Conduct for middle and high school students. The committee also passed the first ever commercial microwave communications installation policy, Policy FC. The committee revised Policy BBAB, which is the student representatives on the board, which enabled us to have Axel's Mr. Samuntu on the board representing Portland Adult Ed. They updated Policy AC, which is our non-discrimination, equal opportunity, and affirmative action policy. They updated JLF, which is our child reporting, prevention, and education, and policy JICA, which is our student dress code policy, and then finally policy ACAA, which is harassment and sexual harassment of students. The non-discrimination, the child reporting, and the harassment and sexual harassment of students policies, those were all required updates that were brought on by changes in legislation that needed to be incorporated. As you know, the policy committee was also coupled with the public affairs. They were one and the same, and so it's already been referenced in the reports from finance and from curriculum that the public affairs committee also hosted the budget forum, Schools for Our Future, and then the proficiency forum that was also hosted here. So that's the work for this past year, and Chair Davis can talk about priorities for next year.
Priorities for the coming year include focusing on completing as much policy work as possible, and as well as planning community engagement sessions with the public. We want to essentially, we have a lot of policies, and we're a little behind in keeping some of them up to date with changes in legislation and just sort of refreshing them. So we want to see how many we can get through and just get things updated, especially policies that really have fairly minor changes but just need to be reviewed on a regular basis. We have a few that still say school committee when they should say Board of Public Education, things like that. So we'll work on that. We're currently looking at and spent our last meeting discussing the staff social media use policy. We're also looking to revise policies BCB, DJ, DJH. We'll be developing an agenda for systematic updating of out-of-date policies and begin that process of getting them updated. And we really are expanding, I think, the activity in the legislative area. It's a new legislative session and a new governor in the Blaine House, and I think around 2,000 bills submitted for consideration at the legislature. So we've been meeting regularly with the city's legislative committee and are really quite integrated in their review process and keeping track of those bills that impact us, or might impact us, coordinating with Maine School Management and other school districts, as well as with the city, to sort of track and follow bills and make sure that we've thought about how they would impact Portland and talk to our legislators as appropriate.
Thank you. And I think we will hear about the year ahead for public affairs.
Yeah. So as I mentioned in the report on the Policy and Legislative Committee, we operated as a single committee in the past. That is different for this year. So are you reporting, Grace? Tim is reporting on that. So Chair Atkinson.
Thank you. The one thing that I didn't hear mentioned from our public affairs work last year was the 10 public forums in the fall for the enrollment and facilities study, which was a significant amount of work, especially for staff. And so I think everything else has been discussed about our work from last year, but we met on January 15th to set schedule for upcoming meetings, and our next meeting is scheduled for February 6th at 5:30 at the district office. And we also scheduled a public forum on budget priorities for March 6th. That's going to be right here in Gasco Bay. So looking forward to that.
Perfect. Thank you. I think we covered all the committees. Nice. So I think it's great that in a few minutes we can talk about all the work that we've done over the last year and what we're going to do next year, and sort of kind of summarize it. But really, it's hours and hours of work, of course, from staff, and then this board, which is really just made up of volunteers. And you guys really do put up a lot of time, a lot of your personal time and sacrifice to do this work. And I just want to say that it really is appreciated, and it's not unnoticed how much effort you guys put into it. So thank you again for everything. Next are consent items. Will the superintendent please speak? Oh, I'm sorry.
Member concerns.
Pardon me?
Other member concerns.
I'm sorry, did I skip that? Sure.
It's committee reports and other member concerns. Yeah.
Yep. I'm sorry, so if we have any other member concerns, Ms. Thompson?
Thank you. I just have a couple things. One is the superintendent will be, as he said, talking about the District Advisory Board Committee. There's a motion in front of all of you this evening with regards to a recommendation. We met on Thursday, January 17th at Lyseth. We also had a public forum prior to that, which was pretty well attended. So we also have talked about various items at the District Advisory Building Committee about building a clear outline of a calendar of when each school we would start going on to the next school and the next school. So that's in the works. That's something the superintendent and staff will have to take a look at and then bring to the board. That's one thing. And I just wanted to know if you could indulge me for a minute, because I came across this the other day, and I'm really, really, really impressed with this staff member, and I just want to read it, and maybe we can give him a recognition, but I thought it was really cool. I'm friends with quite a few teachers on Facebook, and this particular teacher, Simon Williams, is a teacher at Lyseth Elementary School, and he came up with a great idea, and it's a twist for the Portland Public Schools, and I just wanted to read it to all of you because you may not have seen it, and kudos out to him for really trying to invigorate staff. But basically he says, please share. I don't know about you, but I have a renewed sense of optimism and hope for the future in Maine and in our public schools. And I know I don't have control over much, and I don't have a magic wand, but I do have a voice just like you. So today, I'd like to see if I can get the ball rolling in reintroducing the difference makers in the lives of Portland's children. Much of what we see about schools is how much it is going to cost and what the academic data says. And our schools are so much more than that. We are so much more than that. Our schools are filled with so many wonderful, precious, truly special children. And we, educators, staff, school leaders, have been asked to make their lives better, to teach them how to read, how to write, how to be a good friend, leader, compassionate athletes, artists, and the list goes on and on and on. He goes on to talk about a particular staff member, so I'm going to read it because it's relevant. You'll see in a second. He says, I've had the privilege to work in most of Portland Public Schools, elementary schools, the past 6 years, and spend my days with these amazing kids and colleagues like Deanna. He's talking with regards to Deanna Fagoni-Ives, who's one of our teachers at Lyseth. He said he was talking to Deanna the other day, and student after student would come up to her and give her hugs and say hi, or just have a laugh. She's so kind, so funny. She's just great company. She's the type of friend you hope you have in your life because you know your days will always be a little bit brighter because of her. And as I walked away from our conversation, I got to thinking, I wish everyone got to know Deanna. I wish all the parents of Lyseth students got to know that their sons and daughters got to spend their days in school with this amazing person. Not only that, but people in the community need to know about Deanna and all of the wonderful teachers, staff, and leaders at Lyseth and all of Portland Public Schools. I mean, my goodness, he said, these people are incredible. They truly are. Our school system is full of amazing people. So without further ado, I'd like to try our own type of Portland Public Schools Ice Bucket Challenge with the goal of reintroducing all 1,215 Portland Public Schools employees to our greater Portland community. I think you and I both would like to make the next couple of freezing cold months full of stories of kindness, optimism, perseverance, and friendship. So what do you say? This is what I ask. If you are a Portland school employee and you are tagged in a post, that you take a picture with a school colleague. Tell us why you think this person is so special to you. And then nominate 3 other school employees and ask them to do the same. I am so proud to work with so many wonderful people in Portland, Maine public schools. And he says, man, I love you all. So he was going to nominate Deanna and a couple other people. And then I've seen it kind of go viral, that there's a lot more and more. So I just want to, I think that's awesome that a staff member really put himself out there, and people are responding. This already 50 comments and 213 likes and so on and so forth. But I think that's really great, taking an initiative like that to make staff feel all the better about one another. And I wanted to share that because I'm not sure many people may have seen it other than people that are friends, with Facebook, et cetera. But I didn't even know if you guys knew about it, but I just thought it was worth mentioning.
I wonder if, Grace, were you aware of this? I mean, we all know Simon. He's a Renaissance man and an amazing, amazing force for good. So I'm not surprised by that. And,
I thought that was fantastic. So I didn't want to let it pass us by. Thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that with us, Ms. Thompson. It's like #PeopleGoal. And you know what? And it's so special to be recognized by your peers. You know, because the relation between what your goals are. That's awesome. Thank you again, Ms. Thompson. Have I missed anything? Can we consent items?
She'll let us know.
No, thank
She said, "Did we miss anything?" I said, "She'll let us know."
So consent items for the superintendent. Please speak on that item.
For sure. Under Board Policy KCD, the school board accepts by unanimous consent contributions made to the school district. As required by that policy, all of the donations are listed in the board memo that accompanies this item, and as has been the practice, each donor will receive a written contribution acknowledgement expressing our heartfelt gratitude as well as for their tax purposes. I would like to thank the many generous contributors to the Portland Public Schools who have made donations of durable goods, goods of substantial value, and historical or commemorative significance. The contributors for this meeting are for Ocean Avenue Elementary School. They received a donation to pay off outstanding school lunch accounts from Catherine Horitz, DMD, and staff. Ocean Avenue also received a donation. There's a few of these coming. Ocean Avenue's been very busy. Received a donation of jackets, gloves, hats, snow pants to keep students warm this winter from Elizabeth Emery. Ocean Avenue Elementary School also received a donation of jackets, snow pants, snow gear to keep students warm this winter from Allison Gorman. Ocean Avenue Elementary School received a donation of hats, gloves, snow pants, and jackets to keep students warm this winter from Allison and Adam Ayen. Ocean Avenue Elementary School received a donation of jackets, gloves, hats, boots, socks, tights to keep students warm this winter from David and Linda Kirstein. And Ocean Avenue Elementary School received books for all students to enjoy from Ashley Dambois. Casco Bay High School received a donation to support the Junior Journey Expedition from Sally and Ted Oldham. Peaks Island Elementary School received a donation of school supplies from Joyce Stone. Riverton Elementary School received a donation of paint to repaint the back of the stage from Bob Estes, the manager of Lowe's store number 2407. And finally, Riverton Elementary School received a donation of snacks for students from the MEMEC group. So we're very grateful to all the contributors for their generous support of the Portland Public Schools.
Thank you, Superintendent. Next, for the board focus on educational issues, I just want to real quick just speak. On our last meeting, we had a pretty lengthy meeting. We stayed here well past 10 o'clock. Which we should try to avoid for reasons that we've talked about. And so we want in the future to try to figure out a way to time our presentations better and have a better management of our time. Tonight, this one is not going to be one of those times. I want us to have as much time as possible. No. And eventually I'll get to the point. And the reason I'm saying that is that this is, as we know, this is going to be a discussion based on one of the priorities that the superintendent has highlighted for the budget. And I want to make sure that we have a value-driven conversation about this work, and that we all feel confident about the information we're going to have presented to us today. Having said that, Superintendent, do you need to speak on that?
Just very briefly, our board focus, as Chair Rodriguez said, is around our district's behavioral health continuum. And as you know, the Portland Promise whole student goal is central to this. Our whole student goal states that all PPS students will develop the skills, habits, and mindsets that they need to engage in and contribute to our diverse city and ever-changing world. The promise commits us to advance a well-rounded educational experience, to build character, to encourage civic participation, to stimulate creativity and artistic expression, to promote mental and physical wellness, and that's what this presentation is going to focus on, and to awaken appreciation of the natural world and foster global competency. Over the past 2 years, we have taken significant steps to operationalize this goal. One of the key elements of this is the development of district-wide focus on social emotional learning. Today's board focus looks at the current work and at our future direction. As part of the presentation, we will also be going into specifics around the evolution of the Bayside Learning Community Program. As you may remember, last spring, we convened a group of staff led by Assistant Superintendent Malia Nally to look at the programming we offer to our students at Bayside and determine how the program should evolve. As part of that, we wanted to look not just at the necessary physical relocation, but also whether there were ways in which we could strengthen the continuum of supports available to our students and staff. So this is, as Chair Rodriguez said, a very important presentation, and I think you will learn a lot, and this is, we'll get into a high level of specificity around budget issues as well, some of which have been already brought to the Finance Committee and that we will also tackle today. So I would like to thank Malia and her team, Christy Moran, Director at Bayside, and Chris Rieger, our Director of Behavioral Supports. Dr. Chris Rieger, our Director of Behavioral Supports, for doing a thorough job with this very important topic. So, Malia, take it away.
Great. We're just going to get set up, and I think we will be efficient, actually. Oh, and one thing just to point out, you have two handouts that I passed out for this presentation. The first is the PowerPoint, just for those of you that like to have that in front of you. And then behind that should be an overview of some financials that we'll reference later on in the presentation. Great. So, like the superintendent mentioned, the work we're going to discuss tonight connects to the promise, and in particular to our whole student and equity goals, which call upon us to ensure that all PPS students develop the skills, habits, and mindsets they need to engage in and contribute to our diverse city and ever-changing world, and that as a system, we remove barriers and support each and every student's particular path to success in relation to their social, emotional, and behavioral health needs. While we've named these goals as an explicit part of our Portland Promise, we are also cognizant of the significant mental and behavioral health needs students face today, as well as the positive outcomes that result from schools intentionally attending to the social emotional development of all students. Here we've shared a sampling of some recent national statistics and research that support the case for why the behavioral health continuum is a critical part of a district's core work. You see that the mental health and behavioral disorders are diagnosed in 1 out of 7 children ages 2 to 8. The average age of depression has been dropping. In 1978, it was 29, and today it's 14 and a half years old. 16% of high school students have thought seriously about suicide. And research shows that strengthening the behavioral health continuum and providing social emotional support not only improves achievement by an average of 11 percentile points, but it also increases pro-social behaviors and improves student attitudes about school. Given these statistics, it's imperative that schools proactively program for behavioral and mental health supports. This work is not just nice, it's necessary. I'm going to turn it to Dr. Rieger to step us through what we're referring to as the comprehensive behavioral health continuum for the district. Once he's oriented you to the system of supports that are in place or that are being built, we'll pass it over to Christy Moran, who's our new Bayside Day Treatment Director, to talk about how our work on the Bayside program connects to this system of supports. So, Dr. Rieger.
So what are we talking about? Can you hear me? I'm sorry, I'm a little bit microphone. I'm a novice. What are we talking about when we're talking about the behavioral health continuum? We're talking about tiered systems of behavioral supports, focusing on positive and restorative approaches that are trauma sensitive, culturally and linguistically relevant, and designed to support the needs of all students. What does that mean? Here's what it means. It means tiered systems of support are that we're doing something for everybody. Our Tier 1 universal approaches, we're doing some things that are different and more for some students, and then we're crafting intensive and individual approaches and interventions for a few students. And you can see in the universal approaches, the Tier 1, what we call Tier 1, is around classroom-based and school-wide based preventative and early intervention strategies about determining what are the behavior expectations for every member of the school community, how do we teach those explicitly, do we have a curriculum for teaching the social emotional skills that we expect all students to demonstrate in terms of identifying and managing emotions, problem solving, getting along with others? Do we have effective classroom management? Are our classrooms feeling engaging and relevant? Do we have systems for recognizing expected student behavior and adult behavior? And I don't know where people are looking on the camera, but I want to recognize Simon at Lyseth for recognizing Deanna at Lyseth for cultivating positive relationships. So I don't know which camera is looking at me, but recognition is good and important, and the science says we should do it. So kudos to him and Deanna. And that we have consistent and predictable responses for unexpected behavior. How are we responding when students behave in problematic ways? And that we're using data to inform these decisions. We want that to be available for all students. And when students demonstrate that they need a little bit extra help, more support, we have a team that utilizes an effective problem-solving strategy or process so that we can assign that student to an existing intervention, a group intervention, whether it's behavioral or academic, to support their needs, and also to monitor their progress. So if they in fact need more, that team is crafting an individualized or intensive behavior support or academic support plan. That's what we're talking about when we talk about tiered systems of support. We do a lot of things for everybody. We do some things for some of the kids, and then we have some intensive strategies for a few students. A big part of that work is the foundation of which is positive behavioral interventions and supports, or PBIS. And so what is that? It's not a curriculum, an intervention, or a practice. It is a decision-making framework that guides the selection, integration, implementation, and evaluation of evidence-based practices to get at the behavior and academic outcomes we want for students. Yes. What does that mean? Well, it's really a group of people making decisions about what the school stands for and how it operates. And a large part of that work is building systems or infrastructure that supports the good practices that are occurring in the school so that they occur more consistently both within classrooms and across classrooms. So what is that team working on? The factors that I just kind of identified a moment ago. What do we stand for? What are we about? What do we expect? How do we teach it? How do we support it? How do we recognize it and celebrate it? What do we do when things don't go according to plan? And how do we use data? And the science tells us, and there's quite a bit of robust research on this, if the teams do these things well, students learn the skills that will help them be successful. They'll spend less time, we as the staff will spend less time responding to unexpected or problematic behavior, more time on academics. There will be less trips to the office. We'll have improved school climate. We'll have greater school connectedness, which we know is associated with greater rates of graduation. And coming to work and coming to school will be more pleasant, which is an important thing. I'm going to turn it back over to Malia.
Great, thank you. So as Chris just described, the tiered system of supports are in place for all students to access as they have need. Beyond that, there are certain students who have an IEP that is related to an emotional or behavioral disability. These students may require a set of intensive supports or services that go beyond what is accessible to all students. For these students, we must provide what special education refers to as a continuum of services in the least restrictive environment. This is a refresher or basic intro for those of you unfamiliar with the concept of least restrictive environment, which we in special ed refer to as LRE. Basically, you can see that at one end of this continuum, students receive no specialized supports and are fully mainstreamed with full access to the general curriculum. On the other end, students are in the most restrictive setting with the least amount of access to peers in the general education setting. So, as you may recall from our board meeting on September 4th of this past year, we reviewed the recommendations from the work group that was focused on evaluating Bayside in order to provide location and programmatic recommendations. The conclusion from that work group was that PBIS should continues to need an in-district day treatment option to serve our students with the most significant behavioral and mental health needs, and that we need to strengthen the continuum of LRE that I was just describing to ensure that we can provide services to students with emotional and behavioral disabilities in the least restrictive environment. Specifically, we concluded that some students who are being served at Bayside could succeed in a less restrictive environment, but they would not yet be successful in a full mainstream environment. So we decided to work on two key priorities. The first is reviewing the day treatment program to ensure that we're utilizing best practice and to strengthen the clinical emphasis in the program. In addition, we set out to find a new location and to streamline the number of seats from 48 to 32. And we focused on shoring up the continuum of LRE for students with behavioral disabilities by taking a deeper look at the degree to which our middle and high school in-school behavior programs are utilizing a common set of evidence-based practices, and we set out to reintroduce the behavior support classrooms at the elementary level. So Christy Moran, like I mentioned, our Director of Bayside Day Treatment, will now step you through the plans based on our work on these two priorities this year.
Hi. Okay, so oftentimes I get calls or emails that say, Christy, what does a day treatment student look like and sound like? So, it's very different from, a mainstream student, but they're just exaggerated behavior. So it's frequent assaultive behavior, abusive language, frequent eloping, property damage, using items in a threatening way, frequent work avoidance or refusal, and high impact negative adverse childhood effects, which is also ACEs. Excuse me. So this is kind of like our proposal. Well, this is our proposal, right? So what we're doing is we're going to name it the Breathe program. And what the story was that the people collaborating on this were in a room and we said, we can't call it the behavior room. What is the kid going to say? I'm going to the behavior room? That's not very inclusive, right? So we're thinking of names to name it, and a staff member just said, what about Breathe? And I said, well, that seems really cool. It's a coping skill and a name all in one. And then the student can say, I'm going to breathe. And then hopefully they do on their way there. So what we're proposing is, and you can see on the elementary, middle school, high school, and then Breathe Day Treatment Program, you can see kind of what currently exists and what currently does not exist. So currently, what does not exist is any kind of behavior resource room in the elementary schools. So what we're proposing to do is we are proposing to have, at two different schools, 2 classrooms. So a K through 2 classroom and a 3 through 5 classroom in each school. So that's 4 different classrooms with a capacity of 44 students, so 11 students in each room. And then at the middle school, they currently already have a behavior resource room at each school. So we're just going to do some programmatic modifications. So the behavior continuum will all be the same, right? Because that's the whole point. And so that will be 3 Breathe classrooms with a capacity of 33 students. Then at the high school, we currently have a behavior resource room at PHS and DHS, and so those would just need some programmatic modifications. And then what we're finding at Bayside is we have this kind of split high school room. We have these students who are diagnosed with autism, and then we have these other students who are emotionally disturbed. And so when you put those two types of students together, it's almost like the perfect storm, because you have these students who really need to work on social skills and life skills, and then you have these students who, who don't understand that they don't understand. So then there's, arguing. It's not very therapeutic. So we're finding a high need. A lot of referrals come in for the students who are diagnosed with autism. So what we're proposing is at Casco Bay have a class for students who are diagnosed with autism, so they can work on those life skills, and that's just for high school. They can work on those life skills and those things they need in a safe environment. And so with those 3 rooms together, we would have 3 Breathe classrooms and a capacity of 33 students for that. Breathe Day Treatment Program would look a little different. It would still be K through 12, but we would change it to a capacity of 32 students, because we're finding that if we have these programs within the school, a lot of the students won't need to be at the day treatment program. So providing with the least restrictive environment is really, really important, and they can do it. So it'd be with support, so that'd be great. So that's the big picture kind of thing. So the total capacity of the BREATHE program, BREATHE will provide more intensive behavioral support services for 142 special education students to our current seats now is 103. We'll have 10 behavior support classrooms throughout the district, a K through 12 day treatment program, and a high school functional academic classroom to meet the needs of students who are diagnosed with ASD. So this is our projected budget and our current versus our forecasted budget. So I'm gonna kind of let you read it and then I'll explain it. So currently, we're projecting that the day treatment program will cost less because what we're going to do is we're going to take, since we're downsizing Bayside, we're going to take 2 of our special education teachers and move them to a BREATHE classroom, and then take 4 behavioral health professionals and do the same thing with that. So it kind of shows that we're, well, it does show, excuse me, that it's going to cost less money to run that day treatment program. Currently, with the elementary schools, we have no programs in there, so we'd cost, you know, $900,000 to run that. Middle school, that's what it currently costs, and the forecast. So pretty much what you're seeing is staff. So additional staff, so additional behavioral health professionals. I should probably clarify the difference between an ed tech and a behavioral health professional. They have the same credentials. A behavioral health professional just needs a behavioral health professional certification. That's a 24-hour course that they take that helps them deal with intense behaviors. So that would be the difference with that. And as you can see, high school moving down. I'll go to our outsourced, so startup costs. We're projecting $80,000 to get these classes started up and running. It roughly costs $20,000. That's what the science says behind to get a classroom started. Outsourced resources. So outsourced resources is Connections for Kids. It is CASA, it's Woodford's. It's when we have to hire an outside BHP, behavioral health professional, to come in for a one-on-one in a mainstream setting. So this is what we're currently paying. So what they do is they bill Section 65. This is a lot, so if you have any questions, let me know. Okay. So they bill Section 65. And then what Alicia was talking about, the seed money, we then have to pay that seed money. So last year we pay, so with this program, we're taking kids that have a one-on-one and we're putting them into the BREATHE program, and so they won't need a one-on-one anymore, hopefully. It'll be a slow process, and then we will be saving those. We won't have to pay that seed money out. Section 65 reimbursement. So this is what we bill for reimbursement for our services. So just like how I was explaining with the outside resources. So our behavioral health professionals, our psychologists, our clinicians, they can all bill Section 65 for this reimbursement, and it's all at an hourly rate or whatever the unit rate is. There's a huge, you can maximize this reimbursement. It's Maine Care, it's Medicaid, so they are paying, they are reimbursing us for our services. So it's a really, really an important thing to know and to maximize, because, you know, we're getting reimbursed for the services that we're putting out, just like we should. And then, so what we're projecting is for the first year Section 65 reimbursement to be $936,000 for reimbursement with all these programs billing. And so then, as you can see on the bottom, it's almost a wash. It's almost even. So just a little tad bit more.
Can I say something real quick?
You can.
And I do just want to point out to you, so that's a net cost, that $3 million. But what you're going to see in the budget, if this is the program that you move forward, is your expenditures are going to be higher than they are now, but it will offset with reimbursement revenues, which are also higher than they are now. So I don't want anyone to be surprised when that's what happens. We don't net them out on the expenditure side. So it will look like an increase in expenditures, but we will also have the increase in the reimbursement revenues as well. So, thank you.
Thank you. And I think I'm done. Am I done?
For the moment.
I'm done. Thank you.
We'll call you back. So yeah, and so just kind of tying it all up, this total investment requires the costs that Christy just described and that are included in that second handout that you guys have in some more detail, as well as maintaining our Director of Clinical and Behavioral Support Services, which we're currently funding partially through our local budget and partially through our federal grants. In addition, this requires coaching and PD as well as a data tracking system. So we're just trying to kind of sum up overall both the full behavioral health continuum as well as the Bayside day treatment, where we would be investing resources. So How's that for efficient, Chair Rodriguez? Ish.
Don't worry about your efficiency.
Oh, got it. This is where it starts. So yeah, we're all here to answer questions, and Deb Mullis and Nancy Dwyer are here as well, our Director and Assistant Director of Special Education.
Okay, so I think Ms. Thompson was first and Mr. Balfon's after that.
Thank you, Chair. I just, when I looked at the costs associated, when you look at the elementary currently does not exist, the middle school, it sounds as though the two different schools these programs would be at for the elementary level, middle school, high school, different. Just wondering, in your cost association, about the transportation of the students to these different schools, and also how that fits in with transportation for our other students. We're already challenged in so many ways for transporting the students now and getting them picked up and so on and so forth. So how is this going to work into the master puzzle, and how much is it going to cost for transportation?
I don't know how much it's going to cost, but I talked to transportation, and we talked about what schools it could potentially be at, with whatever the space capacity lies, and so we worked out that the students who are in the BREATHE programs would go the closest to those schools. So we're kind of working out a plan, but I think they're very open to anything. They're wonderful. So, but I'm not quite sure how much it would cost.
And we
I would
already
also-
do transport
Oh, yeah.
all of those students, so I think that
What did you
they're, you know,
We already transport.
Yeah.
they're coming to a central location, they would be going to two different locations, so I think that that's the.
So we're already transporting, so I know the cabs and all of that business we've used in the past. So these students, so if they're all in one particular location now, and then we're taking them to two different locations, say for elementary, that doesn't change the dynamic at all? No?
Not substantially. I mean, we have to look at the individual students. We can't say that, 11 kids are going to fall in this geographic, it could be like all 22 kids are coming from one particular area. So we're going to have to look at it, but there isn't a net increase in the number of students that are transported. And for many students, there will be a reduction in distance that are transported versus, being transported to, to Bayside. They'll be transported to a school that might be their local school already.
So far, I mean, and I know we're going to have a workshop on it, on the capacity and so on and so forth, but our elementary schools are at that point, the sweet spot, I guess, they've called them. So do we have the extra, I know in the high schools we certainly do according to the data that's been presented thus far, but the elementary, and are we looking at that as we move forward, because some of them, say like a Lyseth, which is way outside of, on the other side of town, is pretty full, and we're already working on renovations there. And then we have the other side of town, which might be East End, so we're talking, the spread.
Yeah.
And I just was wondering if they'll end up all clumped together at two particular
Yeah.
nearby elementary schools, for instance.
Yeah. So we've been very mindful of the timing and running these processes in parallel, anticipating that we would have to have an understanding of the space options. So this has kind of been very much in that conversation throughout. And it's looking right now like we would have two elementary locations that I think look like they have space. I mean, we really only have two, which would be East End and Row. We have not started deep conversations yet with the team, so I just want to be clear about that this is very preliminary. But those would be great options for lots of reasons when we think about the optimal schools, and also from your point, they're kind of in different parts of the city, which would be great. Mm-hmm. But all of that's not finalized, of course, because it's connected to this whole enrollment and facilities process.
Well, thank you very much. That's what I was going to ask you. I missed the last meeting, unfortunately, for the enrollments meeting. And I know that there's been conversation about pre-K and making enough space to have the pre-K, so on and so forth. Was this brought up the other night? And is it part of our thinking?
It is part of our configuration.
okay.
We'll talk about that in the enrollment and facility study, that is one of the considerations for the elementary redistricting and sort of balancing proposals that we will bring.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Balfins?
I have a question about the projected budget, in particular the Section 65 reimbursement. Is that relatively, constant going out further out in the years, or does that eventually go away, the reimbursement?
No, that's there to stay. I mean, I could talk forever about it, but that's something that will be there for long term, and they keep adding more ways on how we can get more reimbursement for our services as well.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Atkins?
Thank you all for your hard work on this. And this has been, since I started on the board a little over a year ago, this has been a hot topic, and it's great to see some progress and some of the plans coming together. I had a similar question to Mr. Balfonte's question around
capacity.
what are sort of startup costs and one-year costs versus what's a continuing expense or line here. Seems like the startup cost, the 80,000, is sort of a one-year expense. Are the other ones all continuing expenses going forward?
Yeah, the other costs are mostly people, so yes. And I will just say the 80,000 is thinking about, classroom startup. It's because of the sort of outstanding questions on the enrollment and facilities study, which will then influence also where the K through 12 day treatment program goes. If it's in a building, there might be some construction that needs to happen, and that's not baked into this yet because it's very much unknown to us at this point what would be required. And we were not expecting anything significant, but there'd be something there.
Ms. Victor?
Thank you so much for this presentation. Can you talk a little bit about the increase in students served in this, in making this transition? I believe the numbers were from 102 now to 142. Who are the new students? And yeah, so it'd be good to hear more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of what type of seat is the newest, it would be those elementary in-school programs that are, that middle of the continuum of least restrictive, and then that classroom for students with autism that you mentioned also at the high school level. So those are like kind of the newest seats. When we did do the Bayside work group sessions, we had representation, of course, from Bayside, but also from schools, administrators, teachers. And one of the things that really surfaced in that conversation is that, like I mentioned, we felt like we have some students being served at Bayside that could succeed in a less restrictive environment, but they couldn't go all the way back to full mainstream. This is thinking especially at the elementary. Also, there was a sense that there are students that are in full mainstream at the elementary that need more, that we're really struggling with, aware that all the way to day treatment wasn't appropriate. So I think there would be some from both directions and just some, space flexibility there. We're putting this in 2 elementary schools, not all of them, because of many reasons related to implementation, but also at this point we wouldn't expect needing this type of service in every elementary school.
Thank you, that's very helpful.
Ms. Davis?
The budget mentions just over $400,000 of outsourced resources, and then in the forecast that goes to 0. What are we not going to be doing? Sort of what because that's a fairly large amount to
That is.
change.
So every time we hire Connections for Kids or Casser Woodford's BHP to be with one of our students one-on-one all day long, it costs $22,000 a year. And so what we're doing is we're taking 16 kids who have that one-on-one, because in my brain, having a one-on-one and a mainstreamed is more restrictive than Bayside, because we don't necessarily do one-on-ones all the time, and so they have somebody to monitor them, tell them to, pay attention all the time. So it's $22,000. We're taking 16 students and giving them the opportunity to do it on their own and help them succeed that way. So then we won't have to pay that seed money.
Okay.
And just by on their own in these programs that have
Right,
all
with
the
support,
structures and support. So yeah, not totally on their own.
Yeah, not on their own. Support.
Ms. Morioni?
Thank you for the presentation. I have several different questions. So you were just talking about the one-on-one, and so you're saying out of those 16, no one will have one-on-one any longer?
I'm saying it's going to be slow and steady to make sure, and we can have them on and then slowly titrate them off. And then, but yeah, so we'll, within each elementary school, like let's just say elementary, that there'll be 4 BHPs and 1 special ed teacher in the room for 11 students. So they'll be able to manage and be more of like a 2-on-1 or 3-on-1.
Okay, thank you. And then can we talk a little bit about the day treatment? It sounds from the numbers, it looks like it would be significantly reduced as to how many students are in the day treatment. And does that also, as you're thinking forward, is that in the enrollment and capacity group talking about, people have suggested moving Bayside to one of the other, potentially one of the high schools or where there's capacity. So I'm just wondering, have you also talked about, would that number be significantly reduced enough that it could warrant moving it to another facility if needed?
Yeah, I think if I'm understanding your question correctly, we are open to considering the idea that the K through 12 day treatment could get housed in an existing school building. I think that's what I was mentioning. We haven't baked into this any kind of construction costs. Again, I don't think we're imagining something elaborate, but just to make it its own carved out space. Okay. So yes, that is in consideration.
Okay. And then, okay, and then my third question actually was for Mr. Reiger. I'm so sorry.
It's all right.
This is going, and I appreciate you combining both of these, but these are really big topics that just kind of got combined, right? Because we're talking about the rest of the students, and then we're talking about our special needs students. So I have some questions about the comprehensive behavioral health of all students. So did that, when you were talking about those changes in the Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 approaches, did that end up with subsequent cost changes at all for our budget consideration?
No, I think we have to think about how to coach folks through the implementation of these things.
Okay.
So there will be some additional costs because I'm can't do it all on my own. There's a lot of schools here, but a lot of schools are in different places too. So some schools have been doing this work for 6 years or plus, so don't need as much attention and support. But I do think we are going to need additional coaching, which the science says is 2 hours a month per school to really kind of build up. So it's not big. And some of the data management systems we're looking at are $450, $350 a month or a year per school. So the costs are minimal around beefing up the continuum. It really is just getting organized and working smarter than adding.
Okay. And I would just add to that, speaking of adding, that I just brought us back to this resource slide. So, I mean, having Chris's position, having a director of clinical and behavioral support services is critical for our ability to really kind of help support the launch and implementation of this work and the follow-through. So that is a resource investment that we're trying to highlight here. And then you can see we haven't nailed down a precise cost for the coaching and teacher time, which we can do, but there's a lot of variables at play there. But we anticipate cost there. And then Chris mentioned that Swiss data system ultimately is a very small amount of money.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And can you let me know some specifics around, you had written decisions, a PBIS, the team works on teaching behavior we expect everyone to demonstrate. Can you just give me some, because I'm speaking of some experience with regards to high schools right now. And knowing that they're having some difficulties with regards to behavior within the schools, and I know it's being worked on, but I just wanted some examples of what I'm hearing a lot of, even from my own children, is there's no longer a sense of consequences, that the students get sent to the office, and then they're sent back to the classroom without any change of any behavior or anything happening. So I say that only because there's a slight bit of I just want to better understand what you mean by the specifics around behavioral changes and what, yeah.
Yeah, I think a central part of this work is getting folks on the same page. And I think about when I visit my sister's house in Columbus, Ohio, and we have bedtime, which is a really nice time, and they, you know, have kind of some appreciations or prayers, and they read a book, and it I hate to say this publicly, but it just like devolves into chaos because everyone's on a different page, and there are only 2 adults in the room. Right? Not me. I mean, my sister and her husband kind of have different expectations around what bedtime should look like. And it doesn't go as well as you think it would. And high schools have X number of adults and X number of students. And so a lot of this work is just pulling people onto the same page and saying, here's the expectations we have for everybody when they walk in the hallway, when they sit in a CAF, when they're in class, when they're arriving, when they're dismissing. We're going to teach that and make that explicit so everyone's on the same page. We are going to recognize when things go well, because that's the first thing to go when things start getting a little heated. I forgot the second part of your question. I'm sorry, I got lost in my...
Consistent response.
Oh, responses to unexpected behavior. Yeah, I think that where we get stuck is we want to teach the skills that are lagging when students behave in unexpected ways. So we don't want to just punish, because the science says that doesn't educate. And students are learning, and we need good teaching. And so the responses to unexpected or problematic behavior should be restorative. If something was taken away from the community, we should figure out how to give back. But we also want to teach a skill that's missing. And I think oftentimes we feel like that is not a consequence. There should be consequences to all behavior. It doesn't need to be punitive necessarily if it's not going to educate. So it's tricky, and I think it requires a real paradigm shift that is hard. Because if I'm teaching a class of 30-plus kids and a student was disruptive or disrespectful, I feel slighted, my feelings are hurt, my lesson plan went out the window. There's something satisfying in having a consequence that feels punitive. And we all feel that way. But we want to make sure that there's teaching involved to provide that student with skills that he wasn't accessing in that moment, and maybe could access in another time or another context. A lot of this is then restorative, which is a big shift and is very different. So we have to make sure that everyone's on the same page and that the consistent and predictable response is the process. Because it's not that if you did this, you get that. It's if you did this, here's the process that unfolds. Here's the decision-making that we go through to solve this problem and reduce the likelihood that it's going to happen again with the same frequency or intensity. And then here's what's often missing is the communication back to the classroom so that everyone knows this is what happened, here's how it was resolved. And what often is missing too is the relationship repair that happens between student and staff.
And I mean, clearly, you said it better than I could ever say it, but I do think just in this, something kind of to an earlier point you made, Chris, is that it's a system. And so your point about process, I think, is key. So absolutely, this actually helps schools, and like Chris mentioned, the adults get more clear about what we expect. You know, we could all give examples of a time like students are in the hall and they're talking and the teacher's upset. They never said you can't talk in the hall during passing. The teacher's mad, you know, so this becomes a thing, and then nobody knows what the consequences for that. This is helping our schools systematically define those expectations, get on the same page, align on the process for when students don't meet those expectations, and then have a way to track and follow through and use data to make sure that we are being consistent about it.
Oh, that's helpful. Yeah, I appreciate that because, yeah, I think you're right. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity right now for improvement. Yeah, but I appreciate your help, and thank you for you. And I'm a little concerned that you only have 0.6 of an FTE if we're going to...
No, he's...
Oh, it is? Okay, good to know. All right, great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for your concern.
Ms. Bondo.
Yes. I'm kind of a little curious about when I see the volume, when we try to move some of those classes to the elementary school, and I know that maybe on some of the high school, and I see the volume of the work should be done on those areas. Are we thinking about having some community partner like a Spare Wings or some of those on some of those issues like social emotion behavior to come and help on some of those issues, because when you look at the number of the staffs need to be go on the side, and when we mentioned about the one-on-one support that some of the students may need. So are we going to have enough capacity here on the staff to be able to face those situations, or we need to include some of the from the collaboration from some partner outside? That's my first question. And the second one, I try to get some understanding on what you mean about the seclusion room in the school.
Oh.
Because that one needs to look like the clinic one or just something else. That's what I want to understand. Thank you.
Those are two good questions. I can't fully remember your first one, so I'm going to say the second one. So the seclusion room is it's a room to, if a student's having a hard time calming down, that you go into the room with them and you can help them, co-regulate and, do whatever they need to do to take space. So it's a room like that.
Window or without window?
They have a window, absolutely. It's in the door doesn't lock, and it's just, yeah.
Okay. So my first question is about the volume on the staff
Yes,
and the
thank you.
volume of the work. If there's a need to have some of the outsider like a Spare Wings
Yes.
and Opportunity Alliance, also they have a good program as a partner from the community just to try to align on some of the issues like a support one-on-one, social workers, some of the needs. Are you already think about it? Or?
It's a very good question. I don't think that we'll get rid of Spurwink or CFK or CASA or Woodfords. I think there's always going to be a need for those. I think that we're just trying to do it more in-house with our expertise. And so I think there'll always be a need for some type of help with the outsourced resources.
All right. Thank you.
Mr. Balfans?
With the way you're adding classes and modifying the programming at others, do you think that serving 142 students captures all the students that would need this BREATHE program? Do you think we need more or bigger capacity, higher capacity?
Talk about your IP review or
My what review?
you can go ahead first.
Do I think it's going to fulfill the need? I think it's going to make a dent. And I think that you had a really good question when you said you didn't understand, or maybe you do understand, but you didn't understand what the PBIS has to do with special ed, and you didn't quite understand the whole behavioral health continuum. But it's all one piece, so it's a spectrum. So you have you start with prevention and you end with mental health, and so there's different things along the way. But I think that if the school doesn't have PBIS and they don't have expected and unexpected behaviors, and they don't have these rules, and these expectations, and then we put a BREATHE classroom in there that's very structured and has these expectations, and then we're expecting these kids to go into mainstream programming with no expectations, it doesn't make sense. So that's how the whole behavioral health continuum kind of works. Did I answer that question?
Yeah, and we actually did, I think Deb and Nancy are here, and we did a case review of all of our students with IEPs with emotional behavioral disabilities, and I think you guys kind of looked at that, looked at the numbers, looked at some patterns to kind of think about what's a reasonable number of seats for the need right now. So, I think we should obviously continue to check in on it over time to make sure it is meeting the need, but I think we did look at that level at the students on IEPs and feel confident that for right now this will be a really positive direction for us.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I have just two questions. First, can you talk about what it takes to improve or increase the reimbursement from Medicaid? Is that a matter of better documentation instead of changing our process? What does it take?
So currently do you really want me to go into it? Okay. So currently what we're using is a company that is kind of like the middle person. So what we do is we bill, every hour for, let's just say, behavioral health professional. And so we bill every hour for that. And so what we've taken away is that middle person that charges us 7%. And so we've started to input it ourselves. So it's all just about, using our in-district resources and doing that. And then maximizing. I did this in the last district I was at, and it was substantial more reimbursement and well-deserved because we work really hard. So I think it's all about just maximizing having a system and having everybody follow it, and seems to be pretty successful.
Excellent. And I guess my other question was, and I'm not sure how to tie this in, but My understanding of the contracted BHPs is that they really, by the nature of the contract, that they really can only work with one student at a time. So even if we were to ask them, to either cover or to help in us, they just could not. So we are very limited when we use contracted BHP. Is that correct?
Oh, yes, for the outsourced resource, yes, they're only one, and they're for that student, and they're, yes.
So the model that we're...
Our BHPs, we'd have.
Right, I'm contract, well, the ones that we use from that. So what we're discussing about having a number of students with one, we wouldn't be able to do it with the contracted ones.
Correct.
Okay. I guess if there's no other questions, one last comment, and this is just kind of me thinking out loud. When we look at the LRE list, how our, like we said, our ultimate goal is to get everybody into regular classrooms. How, and again, this is me thinking out loud, how special would it be if we really could give every student an IEP, right? If we could treat each student individually and meet their needs individually, and how special would it be if that were our ultimate goal, right? I guess that's all I have to say, guys. Thank you so much for the presentation. Really appreciate it. Again, really important information.
Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.
Every time I flip the page, I'm afraid I'm gonna skip something, so here I go.
Good.
Old business.
There's none.
There's no old business. New business. Consideration and action to amend the Buildings for Our Future BFOF license project budget approval by $500,000 to be funded from bond reserves. Excuse me. Is there a motion? Ms. Thompson, seconded by Ms. Victor. Will this superintendent speak to the motion?
I will start, and then we will have other folks join in. So during the January 8th meeting, we discussed a series of specifications and caveats to the proposal that was in front of you. Among them was that the proposed project as it stood did not include the work that needed to be done on the outside parking and access loop, on what Steve refers to as the CIRC plan, which, as many of you know, are in pretty significant disrepair. The project cost for that in 2019 dollars is estimated to be about $1.3 million. So there has been, across the past few months, significant discussion on this topic at both the Building Level Advisory Committee and at the District Advisory Building Committee. On 12/13, the DABC, the district level team, recommended that Harriman staff develop a phasing proposal to complete aspects of that project using a variety of sources. At that time, we talked about including bond reserves, which is the current $5 million that we're asking to take money from today. Project contingency funds, so those are the funds that are reserved inside the existing project for any kind of eventualities that come up during that process, or from district future investments. During last week's community forum and at the subsequent DABC meeting, it became apparent that Phase 2 of the site work, which primarily involves stormwater mitigation, must be completed at the same time as the renovations are happening in Lyseth. The original strategy was to reallocate funds from the $1.2 million project contingency. That's why we had not asked for an increase in the funding for the Lyseth work. And that, in fact, may work in time, but it's evident, given that the stormwater mitigation needs to be completed at the same time as the project, that we need to have the funds allocated up front so that we can develop the specifications and bid this work simultaneously, or sort of subsequent, but in close coordination with the overall project. And thus, we're asking the board to authorize a $500,000 increase to the LICEF budget, plus a smaller amount that we're going to talk about today, and I have some slides that you're going to see that we got this afternoon, so that's estimated to be about $50,000 to pay for the architect design fees that will enable the specifications to be developed and allow us to select a contractor for that phase 2 work. In the end, the costs for the overall work is, so that original strategy of trying to use the contingency funds would still work if in the end the costs for the overall project are below the $15.7 million that were originally allocated. And in that case, any contingency funds would be returned to the reserve and be used to support the 3 other projects. But I want to be unequivocal that the request today is to take money from the $5 million in project reserves and allocate that to doing phase 2 of the access road and the parking lot projects, which is primarily that stormwater mitigation. This obviously popped up at the DABC meeting, and so we feel that we need to do a little bit of backtracking today so that to help you to understand both this notion of escalation and de-escalation and re-escalation that is at play in the project. So I've asked the Harriman team and Mr. Stilfen to sort of walk us first through that de-escalation from $64 million to what our current expectations are for the different projects. And so we're going to do that. That, for those of you who are members of the District Advisory Building Committee, you may recall, though it's like almost a year now, you may recall that we did that back in April of last year. So we are, redoing that for the benefit of the full board. And then I also thought it was important, given that this, as I said, was a surprise, that it needed to happen in conjunction with the renovations to LICEF. I asked that we also take a step further in that plan for the phasing of the CERC work, because you've seen the 4 phases of that work and you know what they cost, but I also wanted to make sure that you understood what's already done, what's going to be done through this project, and then what remains to be done, the costs associated with that, and the timeline, the range of timeline, and the impact of that range of timeline on the potential costs. So with that, I'm going to turn it over. Mark, I see you there, so that must mean that you're it. So I'm going to turn it over to Mark Lee from Harriman to walk through those slides.
Thank you, Superintendent Botana. So I think I'll walk through. If there are questions, certainly interrupt me, and then I'll recapture a lot of what the superintendent has already discussed. But to first understand where the contingency numbers are and where this project reserve comes from, the idea of de-escalation and re-escalation. The slide in front of you shows at the very top, shows it's a table entitled BFOF escalation. And so what that first column, the escalation from the actual represents, those are the numbers that were passed, or that the $64 million referendum was built from. And those assumed a midpoint in the bidding of all 4 projects, assumed an 18% escalation, because they knew that some of them were going to be earlier than others and some are going to be out further. And so what they did was they sort of picked this was the firm that developed these budgets. They picked a midpoint of 18% and brought it to that amount. That was from a 2017 bid number or estimate number. So at the very beginning of the project, what we did was we took that escalated number and we brought it back to present day value, or present day dollars, and that's the 2019 dollars. And that established the project budgets for all 4 projects. And in today's or present day value, that would be about 54,500,000. So that was the first table that sort of brought us back from that escalated, sort of just a point in time escalation to present day dollars. Then what we looked at was if we actually put a scenario together where we looked at 4 schools going out at multiple times, instead of just picking a midpoint and saying 18%, we said, okay, well let's do a project, the LICEF, is first, because that's going to be bid in 2019, so that shouldn't receive any escalation in the price. So that then is the 15.25, which is the project budget that we're carrying for the LICEF project. Subsequently, we looked at, okay, what if, and this is a theoretical, what if Longfellow were next, and that would be 6%? What if Reiki were next, and that were 16 million, and so on? So that built up those 4 boxes that you see, a particular order in time, and projected forward an escalation at each one of those years, and that assumes a 6% escalation per year going out those 3 years from 2019. So that, and if you add those project costs together, that only totals the 59 million. And so that is why we have a delta between the first assumption of an average escalation to looking at individual project escalations in points in time. So that's what built what we're calling that $5 million reserve. So that's sort of the first basis to understand in thinking about these budgets. And then with and I think we've seen, or you folks may have seen this at multiple times, but this is how we build, and I apologize, the numbers on the screen aren't too legible, but this is how we build the project budget. And so of that 15.25 or so million, I think I've got it right here. Of the 15.252 million, after we add all the soft costs, what we end up is a construction cost of 11.7 million. And built into those soft costs, we always hold apart a contingency of 10%. So that's built into the total project. So when we talk about the LICEF contingency, it's 10% of this 11 million or 1.1 million. So that's built into each of those. That is the project, the LICEF project contingency, apart from that reserve fund for the overall 4 school projects. And so the idea is that 10%, if we have that available, if we don't need to spend that as part of our as part of the spending for this project, those funds are available to spend either on a portion of the CIRC plan, or the site circulation plan, and as Superintendent Botana mentioned. So that's the money that if we don't spend, will get put back into the total BFOF $5 million reserve. And so that's sort of the buckets, if you will, that we're looking at in the thought process of how we would borrow of the $5 million. If we don't need the 1.1 million, that goes back into the $5 million. So that's the first part of this. The second part is understanding the phasing of the site development plan. And so this shows the areas broken down. So the area with a dot on 1, that's the darkest color, is the first part. That's the part that's been done. And that, if you look at the subsequent table, describes the scope of work that was accomplished with that. But it was the parking, and it was some stormwater piping, as well as catch basins and sidewalk work along the edge of the fields. The second part of the site development plan, or the circulation plan, really the biggest part of it is a stormwater basin that treats stormwater that's a part of the school site. And so for that reason, it's required that it be completed in conjunction with the school project. There's also a few other pieces of it. It starts to establish the clear bus lane, a little bit different geometry than the current one is for Lyman Moore. It also establishes some geometry and cleans up some geometry with Junior Street to make that intersection safer. And it also has some visitor parking at the front of that area right now, which is a little less organized. So that's the piece that we're including. That's estimated cost of $500,000 that really needs to be done to treat stormwater that's on the site of the licensed school. So that's the piece that's really in focus. And then subsequent to that, we broke it down into 2 additional phases that could be undertaken. Phase 3, which is a separation of the bus lane from the parent circulation past Lyman Moore to the licensed school. And then the last portion of the work is the parking, the paved area and parking. That's the majority of the parking between the 2 schools, as well as the parent loop for the licensed school. And so again, that's the scope of the various phases and the estimated construction cost and 2019 dollars for those different phases of work. And what we did was the soft cost for that work is slightly less than what we would normally carry for a full building, but keep in mind that there are some soft costs associated with even a site development project as well. So there are design fees, and you still have some contingencies for unforeseen conditions with site work, as well as the cost to actually bid it and supervise the work and advertise for the work and well.
So is that included in those costs?
So that's included in those costs right there. And then in the last column talks about the timing, which the phase 1 has been completed. Phase 2, as we've discussed, is to be done in conjunction with the development of the school project. And then phase 3 and 4 would be determined, to be determined, and can be done as funding is appropriated to those projects. So that's kind of, I think, in a nutshell, the site development piece and the proposed funding of it.
Thank you, guys. Any questions? Ms. Morioni?
Why aren't we considering just doing all 4 of the phases right now? I mean, why wouldn't we already have in front of us the maximum amount that we need to approve instead of having phases?
Yeah, I think the dialogue has been that this is the most critical piece that has to happen as part of that. So I think that's why we've focused on that piece. The question of if all the reserves, or if we used all of the funding for the entire piece, that would really deplete the reserve fund that may be needed for something that we haven't considered as part of the other projects too. So there was some concern at one of the discussions. Is it reasonable that we take a large percentage of that $5 million and just use it on this project? So that was I think the dialogue that.
Can I just to sort of be clear about it? That's why I wanted to make sure that we included what's the timing on it. There is no urgency to allocating the resources for those specific components, right? So that's where theoretically there could potentially be money from the contingency fund for the Lyseth project that could be devoted to that. I think those of us who know construction, or which I don't, but, having, done stuff in my house, I always find that things come up that you weren't expecting. And so I don't hold high hopes that there's going to be money left in the contingency, but that's why it isn't allocated now, because it would deplete the reserves, not deplete, but it would significantly draw from those reserves, and we could potentially have some money in contingency that could be used for it.
And a follow-up to that is, I remember that the city was going to be doing some work on the parking lot and the drainage. I mean, I thought we had already allocated CIP money for some of these things. Am I mistaken?
So in a little bit that comes before our involvement. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
So phase 1, if you go to that next slide.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That was paid for out of city CIP.
Oh, okay.
So the rest was to be done through the bond.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Ms. Davis and then Ms. Victor.
I'd just like to check my understanding, because previously, Ms. Morioni, when we've seen maps of this, there's a 2, just like there is on the parcel that we're talking about with the $500,000 price tag, or plus 50,000 that we're finding out about tonight. The school is also 2, and the permits are tied together. And as I understood, what arose in the meeting last week when I was there is that it became clear that we couldn't wait to do this. All the 2s had to be done at the same time. And I think that needs to be clear. It has already been permitted, and the permits are tied together, so we need to do it now. I think it's a little troubling that seems like something that was a known condition and should have been fairly evident from the beginning as people kind of explored this construction plan. And as I say, when we've seen maps in the committee previously, right on top of the school, that's also 2. It's highlighted the same. It's not there in today's map, but it was there in last week's map.
And it is in the map that you have in the board packet, and I meant to ask that question. I don't know why it was taken out of the map that you have there, but in your board packet, you do have the map that shows 2, 1 and 2 in the building, and then 1, 2, 3, and 4 on the circulation route. So we're not trying to.
Yeah, no, it was intended to simplify because the cost that we have, the $500,000, is for 2 that's shown on the site development, not for all the site work. So we didn't want to confuse it. That's the reason why we didn't shade the area around the school.
And can I also just follow up on Ms. Davis's question and ask you guys to answer that? What is the timing relationship of the permitting and our learning that 2 and 2 needed to be done together?
Yeah, so as we looked at, as we got into the design of the site work and understood where the storm water was being treated for the school project, that's when we met with the city planning, and they said part of that, and we were then brought into conversations with the engineer that did the permit design set for the site development piece, and that's when we learned that a portion of the impervious for the school was being handled by this other project. And so that's how, when we learned how the 2 were being tied together. But that was as we started getting into understanding how we were going to treat the storm water for the building.
When was that?
Oh, that was, I'm trying to think, probably is right around the same time we started having these discussions about the site development piece.
Can you give me a month, a date, a timing?
Was it December? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because when I look back at the agenda for the January 17th, it wasn't even really an agenda item. We backed into this as a surprise in the meeting where it became really clear. Yeah. So I'm concerned that if you learned in December that it wasn't an agenda item for our consideration and action at the district advisory board committee for the buildings. It was then, and it is uncomfortable as a board meeting, as a board member, to kind of back into a surprise this large at the beginning of these projects, because you're right, we are going to encounter other things. We are doing a renovation project, and there's going to be something that nobody anticipated, despite all of your due diligence. That just plain happens. It even happened with Rowe. The soils were not what we thought once we really got into it. So that always happens. And I guess, while you may have been attempting to simplify for us, I actually find it confusing as a board member when the presentation changes. So it would have been clearer for me as somebody who's been, this is a little feedback on how to help the board, is consistency. And if you change a presentation, to really call that out and explain why you have changed the data presentation, because we do follow these from meeting to meeting, week to week, month to month. And to suddenly have it disappear is hard for us to understand, and then hard for us to explain to the public. So just some feedback, and I think some explanation. And hopefully this will be the biggest and only surprise we encounter, but if we should be so lucky. Thank you.
Ms. Victor?
I realize there are complexities with it, but I just wanted to clarify that, and I know the history of how this phase project was included in the bond. But I just wanted to clarify and see if in fact I'm right, that we could not decide to, in fact, use CIP funds to complete this project. There's a prohibition because it's a bonded project, or I'm wondering.
I think that's my understanding as well, and I do think that, that is something that we need to, go back to attorneys. It's complex, so I think generally, yes, you cannot use CIP for existing bonded project. Did you want to say something, Alicia?
I just had this conversation with the city's finance director the other day, because it was voted to take this out of CIP. So this was funded in CIP 1 or 2 years ago, and it was voted to take out of that project and put into the bond. It's essentially already been authorized once. So if we were to take it out and then place it on for CIP, it would essentially be reauthorizing the same project again. So that's why we sort of can't do it that way. So anything that's been sort of taken out and put in here, we need to sort of get through the whole projects and see where we stand with the remaining funds before we can go out and reauthorize the same essential project for new bonds. Did that help at all?
Is that the
Can't bond the same thing twice.
Correct.
We've already got a bond for this, so we couldn't go out, because the bonding is a public process. We couldn't go out and ask, and sell bonds for the same project.
Yes, so, and I believe it's really only for this site work at LISA specifically. This was part of a CIP project, and at the time, it was decided to remove from CIP and place in the sort of BFOF package of bonds. So essentially, this was already approved as part of this project that we're doing right now, which is why we cannot take it out again and sort of place off to the side and reissue different bonds later, because it's already been authorized as part of this project. As far as I know, there are no other CIP projects having to do with BFWF that happened with. I really do think this is sort of the one and only. So it does certainly complicate matters, but that's why it's sort of been packaged this way.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Any other questions? So I guess I have a follow-up question. So then should we assume that phase 3 and 4 also are going to have to be paid out of the 64 mil?
I don't think the entire project was part of CIP. It's always been phased, and we've been approving it as part of phases. So I don't have the answer to that question.
No, it is all supposed to come out of the bond.
Okay.
It is all supposed to come out of the bond. There's no other source to do this, and, let's just, yeah, that's right.
Good.
Yeah, I think this was a large project that was in the CIP, and I believe the whole thing got removed.
Yeah.
So
And there is the potential for that contingency fund to be used to support part of it. But, if it's not supported from that, there is no authorization right now to, fund it, which, again, doesn't mean that it can't be funded out of our existing budget. It doesn't mean, it cannot be bonded again. But, it can come out of our facilities budget. We could have a benefactor. There's lots of other ways in which it could be. We could have a bake sale. There's lots of different ways that it could be funded, but it can't be in CIP.
So I guess the other part is, honestly, I'm not even sure how this ties in. So, and I brought this question up before. My understanding is that a lot of the drainage work is a result of changes in federal laws that we need to comply with. So I'm wondering if there is an avenue for other ways to pay for this, since we're literally just following federal laws that have been changed, so we can update our systems. Is there anything else that we can tap into for payment, for costs, for the payment of this?
Steve, do you want to talk about that, and I can add something if...
We're currently working with the city to federal bonding that's just come available in the last week or so. Doug and I are looking at this to see if we can make an application for submittal to that federal grant under the stormwater. So,
yeah.
GoFundMe
So if you
page.
recall, we removed something from a CIP this year, again, because we're pursuing that funding, so this would be the same, under the same principle.
Excellent, thank you. Ms. Figdal?
So to follow up on that, would our deciding to fund it out of the reserves for the project now affect our ability to apply for this alternative source of funding?
It's a good question. I don't know the answer to that.
I don't have the answer to that either. I'm sorry. I'll find out. It's an emergency, as I read it quickly the other day, it's an emergency storm repatriation of funds to communities around the country. So it's a big federal grant for like FEMA grants, so forth and so on. So I don't know what the legalese is in that whole grant process. Just a prima facie read of it, I don't hold out a lot of hope for that particular one, but we are looking as a city and as a school.
And then my understanding also is this is a timing issue, that we have to move forward the design of this aspect of the site project, and it's already a little bit behind, and perhaps?
Yeah, we actually, we're pretty comfortable with being able to accomplish, particularly if, what we're talking about doesn't require the same amount of time as designing a full school project. So we are comfortable getting bid documents ready even for summer construction this year.
Ms. Davis?
To what extent we pay the stormwater fee to the city as well for pavement and so on. I know at Rowe School, we really designed the paving and the site to minimize our costs in terms of stormwater. What's being done in this case? Is this going to be similar, or are we just replacing what's there?
It's not similar, and we're not replacing exactly what's there. We're protecting that pond in a more comprehensive way, the stream and the pond. It's a filtration design that's going to be different than, it's not designed, it's a permitted project, but there's no detail in the design, which that's what the architects will do with this. And there's certain levels of pavement, pervious, non-impervious trade-offs and so forth. And I think, Doug, did I read the email today correctly? You want to speak to that? Wake up.
Yeah. As the board members who's been present for as long as I've been present, it seems, 4 or 5 years ago, the city came forward with a stormwater fee. That stormwater fee was based on the amount of pervious surface, whether it's a roof or road or anything that's trapping the water and making it run. In our particular case, the first year it was about a $50,000 charge. Most recent year it was close to $120,000. I got word as I was building my budget this year that they're no longer charging municipal accounts. Is that correct?
I don't know why I sit down. So if you recall, last year there were some utility charges that were removed from the budget as we were whittling down of about $125,000. And that was the stormwater fees last year. So they are no longer part of our 2019 budget and will not be going forward.
So we have a commitment from the city to not charge us for that in the future, or is this just a
I believe they have exempted municipally owned parcels.
Okay. Could we, certainly as we get into budgets?
I'm sure I have it in an email. I don't
In an
have
email
a
somewhere.
official on letterhead, but they did direct us to take it out of the budget last year. So.
Okay. I think I'm asking the question, is this a short-term saving?
No, I
for a
believe it's going forward. I believe-
Long-term,
yes.
something we can continue to count on?
That is my impression.
Okay. That's great. That's excellent news. Thank you.
And we will have to maintain the maintenance costs associated with that as we do at Rowe.
Perfect. If there's no other questions, is there any public comment on the motion? None? Any?
Matthew.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Nguyen. Matthew, so I'm sure you know the routines. Please state your name, address, and we'll be looking forward to hearing your voice.
Roberto Rodriguez, I'm so sorry. Matthew Lynch, 41 Edgewood Avenue, also a member of the district building DABC. Also the one that made the motion last week to look to take these funds from that building reserve fund because it's for the entire project, in my view, and that's the position I was sort of standing on when I made this recommendation, and taking a few notes tonight and wondering if, Mark, can I jump a slide back, I think? I want to go to oh, am I going, okay, up to go back. So, as Mark was alluding to, you look at the build 2019 at 0%. Part of my logic and the recommendation that I made to the group last week was based on the fact that, when this went out to bond, it was 2017. There's been escalation costs, or dramatic escalation costs in the industry over the last year alone. And we're seeing, and I'm an architect by trade as well, so seeing similar things that Harriman is seeing, that costs are increasing, and it's a jump that we're hoping. I think everybody hopes it's going to level off, and it's not going to see the market climbs that it has in the last few years. And I was just doing some quick math on escalation costs and where do you begin? Right now, Harriman's working from a standpoint of Lyseth having zero escalation costs. So they're working at a budget of $11.7 million in construction costs. That's really based on some aged numbers already. And is there some automatic escalation there? And is there, we're talking about in this slide here, you're looking at a $5.187 million reserve. What's that reserve do? To me, that reserve was there to protect the entire project. And it's also there to protect against inflationary costs, is what we're looking at here, and that's why Oak Point looked at everything from an 18% scale model. So they added 18% to everything. As Harriman's slide points out, if you start at 0, or even if you start at 6%, you end up with a reserve balance. Looking at starting at 6% and allocating more money to Lyseth, you could still theoretically, if you jump to building in 2022 with a 24% escalation cost, you'd still end up with a $1.795 million reserve. So the question is, what is that reserve going to do at the end of 4 projects? If you have reserve dollars left, that's great, but I don't think that that's the intent, to try and protect this money till the end and build the last school at its budget plus proportional scale and that remaining reserve money. That'd be great, because I suppose you could tear down a school and build a brand new school potentially. So that's some of the logic behind where I was coming from when I made this motion. It's not trying to zap the projects down the road. It's saying, listen, you've built in scale, you're looking at a model right here that shows you how 0%, 18%, you can take that and reshape it in a different way to 22% scale for the last project, or 24% escalation, pardon me, for the last project, and you end up with dollars left over. So it's saying, let's, give Lyseth some of that escalation cost that was built into its original budget. It's not starting at day 1, it's starting at day 365, 385, 95. It's going to start 18 months down the road, so look at it from that perspective.
Thank you.
And just real quickly, too, the federal government's closed. I don't think anyone's going to get any federal money anytime soon either, at the pace that they work at, regardless of being open or not.
Always the voice of reason, Matthew. Thank you. Is there any board discussion on the motion? No. Seeing none. Ms. Victor, did you have some? I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay.
Okay, so Ms. Thompson stepped aside. All those in favor of amending the Buildings for Our Future BFOF Lyseth project budget approval by $500,000 to be funded from the bond reserve. Pardon? Pardon me?
I thought that we had to add another $50,000 for design costs to the $500,000, so that it's actually $550,000.
I think the motion The motion doesn't read that, so the motion should read.
The motion
and
needs to be
it should-
amended.
It should read, and
Or corrected.
architect costs, which my comments did, but the
So
motion does.
let's, so then I think the best way to do it would be to maybe have an amendment on the floor, if anybody can push it up to add the $50,000, unless you guys think we should do it separately. Amended.
It makes sense to amend it to the correct amount.
Mr. Balfins, were you ready to?
Move to amend to 550.
Can, instead of 550, can we say the appropriate architect costs, or you guys,
And in civil
is that cover it, and that's the, I just don't want to wind up with it.
Yeah, we estimate, what we suggest is that we would carry the same percentage for our design costs that we did on the school, so 7%, but there are other administrative costs in any construction project, advertising, legal, and things like that. So that's why we put the, and then a small contingency for unforeseen conditions, even for site work. So that's how we arrived at 10%.
And so what would the terminology be? $50,000 for?
$50,000 for fees and administrative costs.
Okay. I had down design and civil engineering, but I'll go.
Mr. Balfins?
So I move to amend the motion to increase the amount to $550,000 to include fees and administrative costs.
Is there a second? Mrs. Thompson? So is there, excuse me, are there any questions on the amendment? No? Any public comment on the amendment? Any board discussion? So I'll put it up to a vote. All those in favor of amending the motion, as explained by Mr. Balfins, to increase the funds to $550,000 plus fees
And administrative
and administrative costs. Please indicate those in favor. It's unanimous with the students voting in favor. So now back to the full motion. All, I guess we're going to put, excuse me, guys. All those in favor of the amended, excuse me, all those in favor of amending the buildings for a future license project budget approval by $550,000 plus fees and administrative costs to be funded from the bond reserves, please indicate. It's unanimous with the students voting in favor as well.
Thank you very much, and thank you, guys.
Yes, thank you all. Appreciate it. Excellent. All right, moving along. Personnel items. Consideration and action to approve the personnel items listed on one-year-only teachers. Is there a motion? Mr. Atkinson, seconded by Ms. Bondo. Will the superintendent please speak to the motion?
Barb, Ms. Stoddard, anything on the personnel? We never talked about this. There's,
Mr. Yates?
I think there's 2 items on personnel. Or maybe just in my, yeah, just one.
There's different personnel.
Yeah, that has to go out. That's for November 27th.
We have just one item on the personnel.
Okay.
Okay, and that's just, that's a vacancy that we're filling? So
That's
it's
correct.
budgeted.
Yep.
Are there any questions on the motion? There are no public comments on personnel items. Any board discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor of approving the personnel items as listed, please indicate. It's unanimous with the students voting in favor. Thank you. And then, it's perfect. So given that it's before the hour of 10 o'clock, if there's any public comment on items not listed on tonight's agenda, please move forward. No one? True, someone at home is yelling at the TV. All right, perfect. We're ready to for our workshop. So right after our business meeting, we're going to have the workshop on for an update on the enrollment and facilities study. So please stick around for that. Other than that, if there's is there a motion to adjourn the business meeting? Mr. Balfin, seconded by Ms. Davis. All those in favor, please indicate. It's unanimous with the students voting. Thank you so much, guys. Have a good night.